Welcome back to the Perfectly Homeless podcast. We're continuing with the State Homeless Score Project. No procrastinating. Let's jump right in.
Yeah, I'm a huge procrastinator and didn't get my birthmark until I was 11 years old.
Right. Well, it's definitely time to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for you listening right now, today we are taking a documentary-style approach to look specifically at Pennsylvania. We've pulled together this massive stack of state policies, local journalism, funding data, and real on-the-ground reporting.
It's a lot of material to sift through, honestly.
It really is. And our mission today is simple. We are building a scorecard for Pennsylvania's homeless efforts in real time. We're evaluating 6 distinct areas of how the state actually handles the crisis.
And just a quick heads up for you, the score you hear is going to evolve dynamically as we peel back the layers of this system.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to be patient for the final grade. We are not giving it all away up front.
Definitely not. To accurately grade Pennsylvania, you really have to grasp the sheer mathematical scale of the issue first.
Looking at the 2024 data, there are 14,088 residents experiencing homelessness on any given night across the state.
Wow, over 14,000.
Yeah. Now, statistically, that is an 8.6% drop since 2015.
Well, wait, I'm looking at this updata here, and it shows 81% of those individuals are officially classified as sheltered.
Right, which leaves about 19% or 2,635 people unsheltered.
Okay, but if we just take that 81% at face value, that sounds like Pennsylvania is passing with flying colors, right? I mean, it paints a picture of a state successfully catching 8 out of 10 people falling into crisis.
The paperwork certainly tells a triumphant story, yeah. But the reality on the ground operates entirely differently.
How so?
Well, it's because of this massive geographic divide in the state. In urban centers, like Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, homelessness is highly visible.
Right, you see it on the street.
Exactly. The unhoused population interacts with city infrastructure. But in rural Pennsylvania, the crisis is largely invisible.
So that 81% stat is missing something.
It dramatically fails to capture the people who are technically unsheltered but simply out of sight.
That makes intuitive sense, actually. Out in rural farm country, you don't have, like, subway grates or park benches under streetlights for people to sleep on.
Right. The environment forces a totally different kind of survival. It forces displacement into the shadows.
Oh, wow. What does that look like?
You have families relying on the goodwill of relatives to couch surf, at least until that goodwill runs out.
Yeah, which it always does eventually.
Right. You have people living in unweatherized RVs tucked deep into private campgrounds, or they're simply sleeping in their cars parked down, rural dirt roads where local police just don't patrol.
So it's a completely hidden crisis.
It is. And to figure out why so many residents are forced into these invisible, precarious situations, we have to look at the structural forces pushing them out of traditional homes.
Which brings us to our first scorecard category. Housing affordability. Let's examine what it actually costs to keep a roof over your head in this state right now.
Yeah, the supply side of the housing equation seems incredibly fractured, depending entirely on what county you live in.
The supply constraint is the engine driving this entire crisis, isn't it?
Absolutely. Take Lebanon County, for instance. The housing occupancy rate there is hovering over 99%.
Wait, 99%? That's insane.
It is virtually impossible to find a vacant unit regardless of your income. There's just nowhere to go.
Right. And then you look at a place like Schuylkill County, which tells a totally different story.
Yeah, that community is wrestling with the long-term economic fallout of industrial decline and the opioid epidemic.
So the housing stock there is aging, and a lot of it is just dilapidated.
Exactly. But I want to break down the mechanics of how outside investors exploit a depressed market like that, because it's a crucial piece of this puzzle for you to understand.
Yeah, the out-of-state LLCs, right?
Right. They use algorithms to identify cheap, aging housing stock in struggling rural counties. They buy these properties up sight unseen.
Oh, wow, sight unseen.
Yeah. And because they have absolutely no ties to the community, they perform zero maintenance. But they aggressively hike the rent.
Because they know the local supply is fundamentally constrained. People have no other options.
Exactly. The financialization of rural housing is incredibly aggressive. When you combine those speculative rent hikes with general inflation, the working poor are structurally priced out of their own hometowns.
So what does the state do about it?
Well, their primary defense is a safety net called the Homeless Assistance Program, or HAP.
Okay. How does HAP work?
Through a block grant system, if you are under 200% of the federal poverty line, you can apply for rental assistance to stave off an eviction.
I pulled the exact numbers on that HAP assistance, and man, this is where the policy feels entirely disconnected from the math of modern real estate.
The limits are pretty strict, yeah.
The assistance is rigidly capped. Like a single adult can get up to $1,000 and a family can get up to $1,500.
Right.
But that is the maximum payout allowed over a rolling 24-month period. Over 2 whole years, you only get $1,500.
The legislative intent there was to provide a quick bridge for a temporary financial hiccup, like a medical bill or a broken down car.
But the crisis we are talking about isn't a temporary hiccup. It's a permanent structural shift in the cost of living.
Exactly. It doesn't match the reality anymore.
If a corporate landlord raises a family's rent by $400 a month, a one-time $1,500 check might delay the inevitable by, what, 3 months?
Yeah, if they're lucky.
It doesn't solve the underlying math at all.
Yeah.
You're trying to plug a sinking ship with a very small, one-time cork.
It's just delaying the eviction, not stopping it.
Because there is a severe lack of available quality housing units and the state's assistance caps are so rigidly detached from inflation, this lowers the overall picture.
And when that math finally breaks them, the family gets evicted. That triggers the next phase of the crisis, finding an emergency place to sleep.
Right. Which brings us to category 2, shelter access.
And that geographical disparity we talked about earlier, it becomes a matter of life and death here.
Because of the lack of resources.
Right. Urban areas have established well-funded shelter networks. But if you lose your apartment in a rural area like Susquehanna County, the infrastructure drops to zero.
Wait, literally zero?
Literally zero. There are no emergency shelter programs in the entire county.
Wow. Let's clarify what that means for you if you live there. Because many states have what are called Code Blue mandates.
Right, the emergency warming centers.
Yeah, these are emergency protocols that force local governments to open warming centers, like gyms or church basements, when the temperature drops below a life-threatening threshold, usually around 20 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, it's meant to keep people from freezing.
So what happens during a Code Blue in Susquehanna County?
Nothing happens. They do not have a Code Blue emergency shelter. If the temperature hits 0 degrees, there is no official building opening its doors.
That is terrifying.
It is. And it completely invalidates the state's data collection methods, too.
Oh, because of the PIT count.
Exactly. The official point in time, or PIT count, is mandated by the federal government to happen every single year during the last 10 days of January.
Okay, think about the logistics of that for a second. In a city, volunteers can easily walk down a grid of streets and count tents or bedrolls.
Right, it's concentrated.
But doing a physical count of unhoused people in rural Pennsylvania during a January snowstorm, you can't dispatch volunteers to hike down miles of unplowed dirt roads looking for hidden cars or camouflaged RVs.
You really can't. The methodology is intrinsically biased toward urban environments.
So they just miss them.
A massive portion of rural, unhoused people simply are never counted.
Wait, going back to the HAP funding we just talked about, doesn't that state block grant specifically allocate money for emergency shelters?
The funding exists on paper, yeah.
Right.
HAP grants do fund emergency shelter stays, which are usually capped at 10 days unless a county waiver is approved.
So the money is there.
It is. But funding is utterly useless if there is no physical structure to spend it on. You cannot use a shelter voucher in a county that is not built to share.
Wow. You can hold a winning lottery ticket, but if the bank doesn't exist, you're still broke.
Exactly. People are left entirely to fend for themselves in freezing conditions.
Because rural residents are left completely out in the cold without physical options, this lowers the overall picture.
So when the system fails to provide 4 walls and a roof, human beings rely on the next best thing to protect them from the elements.
Which is their vehicles.
Right. It becomes their only sanctuary. But living in a vehicle introduces a severe legal vulnerability, leading into Category 3, criminalization and enforcement.
How does Pennsylvania legally handle people forced to sleep in their cars?
Well, in terms of state legislation, Pennsylvania does not have a sweeping statewide law that explicitly bans sleeping in a vehicle.
Okay, so it's not illegal at the state level.
Right. The state leaves enforcement up to local municipalities. So in a place like York, Pennsylvania, you won't find a law specifically outlawing the act of sleeping in your car.
But there's a catch, I assume.
There is. You will run into strictly enforced overnight parking restrictions in commercial and residential zones.
Ah, I see. So you aren't a criminal for sleeping. You're just not legally allowed to park anywhere to do it.
Exactly. It creates this exhausting nocturnal migration where people are constantly moving their cars just to avoid tickets.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. But the real danger is a specific legal mechanism in Pennsylvania's DUI laws known as actual physical control.
Let's explore the mechanics of this because it is absolutely terrifying for anyone trying to survive winter in their car.
It really is a trap.
The actual physical control doctrine was originally designed to arrest drunk drivers who pulled over to sleep it off, right? Before they could wake up and drive again.
That was the intent, yes.
It means you don't have to be actually driving the car to get a DUI. You just have to have the keys and be in a position to operate it.
And the unintended consequence is devastating for the unhoused.
Walk me through it.
Imagine it is 15 degrees outside. You are parked in a dark lot. You are completely sober, but you need to turn the car on for 10 minutes every hour just to run the heater so you don't freeze to death.
Right, you have to stay warm.
Under Pennsylvania law, if you are sleeping in the driver's seat with access to those keys, an officer can hit you with a DUI under the actual physical control statute.
You are criminalized for trying not to freeze to death.
Yes, exactly.
And getting a DUI completely derails your life. It comes with massive fines you can't pay, license suspension, which means you can't drive to work, and a criminal record.
A record that most corporate landlords will use to automatically deny your future housing applications, too.
You should get locked into poverty.
It creates a perpetual underclass.
Yeah.
I should note, just as a matter of impartial policy context, that the 2024 Supreme Court ruling in Grants Pass v. Johnson explicitly gave municipalities the constitutional green light to criminalize sleeping in public spaces.
Right, that was a huge national ruling.
But despite that ruling, Pennsylvania has maintained its decentralized approach. The state hasn't rushed to enact a punitive statewide ban on public sleeping.
They're just leaning on those local trespassing and parking codes instead.
Exactly.
Well, it is definitely a relief that the state hasn't weaponized the Grants Pass ruling for a statewide crackdown. However, that actual physical control DUI loophole is a ticking time bomb for vehicle residents.
It really is.
State policy avoids outright bans, but maintains these severe local traps, so this shifts the score.
Let's pause and look at the cumulative effect of what we've covered so far.
Good idea.
We have severe rural housing shortages, zero emergency winter infrastructure in key counties, and a precarious legal tightrope for those living in their cars.
Okay, I am putting our preliminary score overlay on the board right now. We are officially calling this our draft score.
Drum roll, please.
Based on the metrics so far, Pennsylvania is currently sitting in a draft score of a C.
A completely average grade that reflects a system doing just enough to manage the crisis, but nowhere near enough to cure it.
Keep in mind, this is absolutely not the final score for you to take away.
Right, we've only covered 3 categories.
We still have to evaluate how the state actively reaches out to help these populations and whether they can actually move people into permanent homes. Those factors may significantly change the final result.
Let's pick up exactly where we left off living in a vehicle.
Category 4, vehicle dwelling friendliness.
Right. If you are dodging parking tickets in residential zones and terrified of the DUI trap, where is it actually safe to park your life?
It doesn't sound like there are many options.
State-managed infrastructure offers very little. PennDOT rest areas are heavily monitored with strict 2-hour parking limits.
2 hours is barely a nap.
The Pennsylvania Turnpike Authority is slightly more lenient, allowing 24-hour parking at their service plazas, which gives a brief window to rest.
But 24 hours isn't stability. However, we are seeing some incredible infrastructure emerging at the hyperlocal level, aren't we?
We are. The Berks Coalition to End Homelessness operates a safe parking lot in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Okay, tell me about that.
This is a model of what actual intervention looks like. It isn't just an abandoned lot where the city turns a blind eye.
It's purposely designed infrastructure.
Exactly. The lot features a locked gate to prevent unauthorized access at night. It provides safety lighting, portable restrooms, hygiene products, and a charging station so people can keep their phones alive for job interviews.
That is huge. To understand the psychological impact of a lot like that, you really have to understand the mechanics of a poverty tow.
Oh, yeah. The poverty is brutal.
It happens when you accumulate unpaid parking tickets because, you have nowhere legal to park.
Right.
Eventually, the city boots your car and a private towing company impounds it. The daily impound fees often exceed the total value of the car within a week.
It escalates so incredibly fast.
In one fell swoop, the state confiscates your shelter, your transportation, and your only remaining asset.
That's devastating.
Compare that daily gnawing terror of losing everything to the physical relief of pulling into a gated sanctuary like the Reading Lot.
It's night and day.
Because Pennsylvania is actively fostering these localized safe havens, this raises the overall picture.
It really acts as a critical triage center. The true value of the reading lot isn't just the asphalt, it is the direct connection to case management.
Bringing social workers directly to the vehicles.
Yes, that is how you actually transition people out of the crisis.
Which opens up Category 5, Outreach and Social Services. How does the state manage its social outreach?
It's complicated.
Like, how do they track down the folks hidden in the rural woods or parked at these designated lots?
The mechanism the state uses is that decentralized human services block grant we mentioned earlier.
Right, the HEP funding.
Decentralization is frequently criticized in government, but here it actually functions as a major strength.
Really? Why is that?
It allows individual counties to tailor their HAP funding to highly specific local needs, funding intensive case management through local nonprofits.
Oh, so they can adapt to what their specific community requires.
Exactly. Organizations like the Women's Resource Center in Scranton and the Sexual Assault Resource and Counseling Center, or SARC, in Lebanon rely on this local flexibility.
The inclusion of domestic violence in sexual assault centers is paramount here. Abuse is one of the primary catalysts for housing instability.
It really is.
When a home becomes physically dangerous, houselessness becomes the only logical alternative, especially for women and children in rural areas who just don't have a broad network of support.
The trauma is the driver of the poverty, but the funding mechanisms have a critical flaw regarding sexual assault survivors.
What's the flaw?
By law, general HAP funding cannot discriminate. It must be available to the general homeless population.
Okay, that makes sense.
Conversely, highly specific funding earmarked for domestic violence often requires the victim to be actively fleeing an immediate physical threat.
Oh, I see the bottleneck there.
Yeah.
The reality of sexual assault trauma often involves delayed disclosure. A survivor might not come forward or lose their ability to maintain housing until months or years after the incident. Exactly.
They are actively fleeing a house on that specific day, so they don't qualify for the emergency domestic violence grants, but they still critically need specialized trauma-informed housing.
And that's where SARS in Lebanon steps in. They are one of the very few standalone sexual assault organizations in the entire state that manages to navigate these rigid grant definitions.
So they can provide targeted, specialized housing help for survivors experiencing that delayed trauma fallout.
Yes. The system's essentially held together by the sheer willpower of these local nonprofits decoding state bureaucracy.
Despite the bureaucratic hurdles and complex funding definitions, the state intentionally empowering these highly dedicated local outreach programs is a massive positive.
It absolutely is.
The localized approach works. So this raises the overall picture.
But, outreach is vital, but case management is ultimately just a bridge.
Right, and a bridge only works if it connects to solid ground. Exactly. A social worker can help you fill out every application perfectly, but if there is no physical apartment available at the end of the process, the outreach fails.
That brings us to our final category, pathways to permanent housing. Are these systems actually moving human beings into permanent homes?
The systemic math is bleak. Last year, the data shows 30,536 Pennsylvanians entered the homelessness system.
Over 30,000.
Yeah, but during that same period, only 11,859 were successfully moved into permanent housing.
Wow. So the system is taking on water twice as fast as it can bail it out.
Basically, yeah.
Nearly 20,000 people are just accumulating in the backlog every single year.
It's compounding. And the mechanism designed to prevent that backlog is HAP's Bridge Housing Program.
How's that supposed to work?
It provides subsidized transitional living for 12 to 18 months. The goal is to give a family time to stabilize, save money, and eventually secure a permanent public housing voucher, like Section 8, or move into the private market.
But we already established that the private market in places like Lebanon County is at 99% occupancy.
Right.
So they can't transition there. They have to wait for public housing.
And that public housing pipeline is entirely frozen.
How bad is the wait?
In Lackawanna County, for example, the wait list for a public housing unit historically sat at around 9 to 18 months. Today, that wait list has exploded to 3 to 5 years.
Wait, 3 to 5 years? Why did it jump so drastically?
Because the people currently living in permanent public housing units cannot afford to leave them.
Oh, because everything else is too expensive.
Exactly. Starter homes are incredibly expensive, and private rent is astronomical, so nobody graduates out of public housing.
And because nobody leaves, no units open up.
Right. And because no units open up, the people in the 18-month bridge housing programs age out of their transitional support years before a permanent unit becomes available.
So they get pushed right back into their cars.
It's a logistical nightmare.
Just to maintain our impartial context here, I will point out that the state government is legally aware of this pipeline failure.
Yeah, they are.
In 2025, Governor Shapiro signed an executive order aiming to create a statewide housing action plan specifically designed to target this bottleneck and increase the physical inventory of housing stock.
Which is good. Policy plans are a step, but they take years to manifest into actual wood and nails.
Right. A plan doesn't house someone tonight.
Exactly. Right now, a 5-year wait list for a permanent home is catastrophic.
You cannot ask a family to put their survival on hold for half a decade while bouncing between temporary shelters and 24-hour turnpike rest stops.
You really can't.
The sheer failure of the permanent housing pipeline is devastating. Based on this, the current draft score is ready to be finalized.
I think it's time to synthesize everything we've uncovered.
Yeah. I'll summarize the overarching narrative for you. Pennsylvania possesses some undeniable strengths.
They definitely do.
They have refused to implement a punitive statewide ban on vehicle dwelling, dodging the outright cruelty seen in other regions.
That's a big plus.
Their decentralized block grant system brilliantly empowers local agencies to do highly targeted, trauma-informed work.
Right.
And they are actively incubating innovative, life-saving infrastructure like the Berks County Safe Parking Lot.
However, the systemic weaknesses severely undercut those efforts.
Yeah, they really drag it down.
The complete lack of emergency winter shelters in rural counties abandons the most vulnerable residents.
Leaving them in the cold.
The state's aging housing stock is being squeezed by out-of-state speculation, and the public housing waitlists have ballooned to 5 years, creating a completely frozen pipeline that traps tens of thousands of people in transitional limbo.
It's heartbreaking. Let's lock in the final grades for the state.
Okay, here is how the scorecard breaks down.
Let's hear it.
Housing affordability receives a D, driven by speculative pricing and weak assistance caps.
Ouch. Okay.
Shelter access earns a C-, heavily penalized by rural code blue failures.
Makes sense.
Criminalization and enforcement gets a B-, acknowledging the lack of state bans but penalizing that DUI trap.
Right.
Vehicle dwelling friendliness earns a solid B for the turnpike access and safe lots.
That's fair.
Outreach and social services is the highest mark at a B+, thanks to the block grant flexibility.
And the final category.
Pathways to permanent housing receives a D due to the 5-year waitlist bottleneck.
Okay, so factoring in all the systemic realities, the final perfectly homeless state score for Pennsylvania is a solid C.
To justify that final grade, Pennsylvania manages to avoid the aggressive, punitive cruelty we see legislated in other states, and it empowers truly fantastic local outreach teams. But its severe rural shelter deserts and an entirely frozen permanent housing pipeline keep it from actually curing the crisis for its residents.
It forces you to rethink everything we assume about this issue. We started the evaluation marveling at that 81% sheltered statistic, picturing a system that was working.
But the reality is that the face of this crisis has fundamentally changed.
It really has. We often picture an isolated individual on a city street. But because of this 5-year housing bottleneck, the fastest growing demographic of unhoused people are often families with children or elderly folks on fixed incomes who simply got out-leveraged by an algorithm setting rent prices in their rural hometown.
They are managing their crisis quietly, parked in a gated lot, just waiting for a pipeline that refuses to move.
That's the perfectly homeless state score for Pennsylvania.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for tuning in, Pop. If you find the series interesting, please tap the like, A, and D subscribe buttons, and we will see you in the next state. If you'd like to support the project, click on over to the Perfectly Homeless Etsy store and get yourself a warm hoodie with our logo, or you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/perfectlyhomeless. Every purchase and donation helps fund future episodes in this 50-state journey through homelessness in America. Wear the logo. Start a conversation. Because homelessness isn't someone else's problem anymore. It's happening in every state, every city, and more neighborhoods than most people realize. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I'll see you in the next episode.